I was rinsing out my coffee mug when the phone rang. Lydia's name flashed on the screen. My daughter, my only child. I smiled, thinking maybe she finally wanted to check in, like she used to. "Mom," she said, her tone sharp, efficient. "We're moving out tomorrow. The lake house is sold. You don't need to worry about it anymore." At first, I thought I'd misheard. "I don't need to worry?" I asked. "It's all handled," she said. "The sale went through. We'll send you your share once we settle everything. Anyway, we're flying out next week. Europe. Big opportunity for Eric." And just like that, she hung up. No goodbye, no "I love you," not even a pause long enough for me to react. I stood there, the mug still dripping, the phone pressed to my ear. I didn't even blink. The lake house, our lake house, sold? That house was never just property. It was the place Thomas and I built when we had nothing but 2 paychecks and a shared dream of summers by the water. He'd painted every wall himself. I'd planted lavender by the porch. Every corner had his fingerprints on it. And now, according to my daughter, it was gone. I don't remember sitting down, but I must have, because a few minutes later I realised I was at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me. His chair. I still set his coffee cup there every morning. Call it habit or denial, or maybe love that just refused to die quietly. For a moment, I felt the sting of humiliation. My own daughter had stripped me of my home, my memories, and somehow managed to sound like she was doing me a favour. Then something strange happened. The shock began to fade, replaced by a calm so deep it almost scared me. It wasn't peace. It was focus. I picked up the phone again, not to call her back, but to replay her words in my head. "The house is sold. You don't need to worry." That's when I smiled. Because Lydia might have thought she'd played her mother, but she'd overlooked something, one very important thing. Thomas had always been the quiet planner, the man who paid bills early, double-checked insurance forms, and refused to let me throw away old tax records. He once told me, "You should never let people know everything you own, Annie. Not even family. Especially family." At the time, I'd rolled my eyes and called him paranoid. Turns out he wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. I got up and walked to the bedroom. The air smelled faintly like his cologne, even after all these months. His side of the dresser was still organised the way he liked it. Shirts on the left, folded sweaters on the right, and one locked drawer at the bottom. I knelt down and pulled it open. Inside was a plain yellow envelope. No note, no label, just my name written in his neat old-fashioned handwriting, Marianne. I'd seen it before, the day he died, actually. He'd said, "Put this away, honey. Open it when you're ready." I hadn't been ready, until now. My hands trembled as I held it, not from fear, but from something sharper. Awareness. I didn't even need to open it yet. I already knew Thomas had left me something that Lydia had no clue about. I sat back on the bed, staring at the envelope like it was alive. In a way, it was. Because if there was one thing Thomas Cooper knew how to do, it was build a plan that outlived him. The funny part? I wasn't angry anymore. Anger felt small compared to what I felt now. This wasn't about revenge, it was about balance, about making sure my husband's trust wasn't wasted and my daughter's lesson wasn't missed. I walked back to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee and opened the curtains. The lake shimmered in the distance, still there, still mine, even if she thought otherwise. For the first time since Thomas passed, I felt awake, really awake. Lydia had pulled the trigger, but she didn't know her mother still had the safety lock. That thought made me laugh. A dry, genuine laugh that startled me a little. I caught my reflection in the window. Grey hair, tired eyes, but a grin that hadn't been there in months. "All right, Thomas," I murmured. "Let's see what your final plan looks like." The room felt lighter somehow. Maybe it was the sun, or maybe it was the satisfaction of realising that the game wasn't over. It had just started. And if you're watching this, tell me, what would you have done if your own child sold your house behind your back? Would you explode, or would you wait and let karma do the heavy lifting? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if stories like this one make you think twice about what family really means, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I leaned back, let the mug warm my hands, and looked at the envelope on the table. It sat there, innocent and quiet, but somehow I could almost hear Thomas's voice again. Calm, steady, reassuring. And suddenly, Everything about that phone call didn't seem like an ending at all. It felt more like the start of something he'd planned long before I even realized it. The morning light crept through the blinds while I stared at the envelope on the table. My fingers brushed over my name, and I could almost hear Thomas humming in the kitchen like he always did. That tune he'd hum when the coffee was brewing, something slow and cheerful, like he could never imagine a bad day starting with caffeine. That sound was the last thing I heard the day he died. It had been 6 months earlier, an ordinary Thursday. He was wearing his old flannel shirt, the blue one I used to complain about because it looked like it had survived 100 winters. He was pouring cream into my mug, smiling like every morning before. "You're my calm in every storm," he said, kissing my forehead. Then he sat down, flipped open the newspaper, and the spoon clinked once against the cup. When the spoon fell again, it hit the table hard. That was the sound that started the rest of my life. I remember shouting his name, shaking him, the coffee spilling across the table. His hand was still warm when I grabbed it, and for a ridiculous second, I thought he was playing one of his quiet jokes. But the stillness told me otherwise. The paramedics came, the neighbours whispered, and the house filled with that strange kind of silence that feels like it's listening to you breathe. When they finally took him away, I stood at the door with my fingers pressed to my lips. He'd left without warning, and all I could think was how he hated leaving me alone in crowded rooms. Yet now he'd done just that. The funeral was small, just the way he wanted. Lydia handled everything. She picked the flowers, arranged the service, even smiled through her tears when people told her how strong she was. Everyone said how proud I must be of her, how lucky I was to have such a devoted daughter. And for a while, I believed it. After everyone left, Lydia stayed behind to help me settle the house. She took over his desk, sorted through his files, and neatly labelled boxes: insurance, mortgage, bank accounts. She was efficient, confident, and I told everyone she had her father's brains. Maybe I was just trying to believe she still had his heart too. One evening, about a week after the funeral, she came into the kitchen holding a folder. "Mom, I went through Dad's documents. Everything's organised now. I'll handle the rest. You don't have to worry about a thing." It sounded comforting at the time. But there was something in her tone, something sharp behind the kindness. I missed it then, because grief dulls everything, even instinct. The next morning I woke up to find her sitting at his desk, his reading glasses on her face. She was flipping through papers, her expression blank. When she saw me, she smiled too quickly. "I was just checking Dad's investments," she said. "He had a few things I didn't know about." I remember laughing softly. Thomas always had a few things we didn't know about. She smiled back, but hers didn't reach her eyes. Sharon, my neighbour, stopped by later that week with a casserole and a whisper. "She's been in and out of the bank a lot lately," she said. "Maybe she's just helping, but be careful, honey. People get strange around money and grief." I brushed it off. "Lydia wouldn't do anything like that. She's my daughter." Sharon just nodded, but I caught that look, the one people give when they already know something you don't. For months, I lived in slow motion. I'd wake up, make coffee for one, and stare at the empty chair across from me. Some mornings I'd talk to him anyway, just to fill the silence. "You'd laugh if you saw how Lydia's running the place," I'd say. "She's so organised now, you'd be proud." And every time I said it, something inside me would ache. Not because of him, but because I wasn't sure anymore if I believed it. One night, while sorting through his old flannels to donate, I found a small notebook tucked in the pocket. His handwriting covered every page: dates, notes, addresses, numbers. There was even a line that said, "Talk to Howard about the LLC. Keep Marianne's name on everything." I didn't understand what it meant back then. I thought maybe he'd been planning more paperwork, maybe just another project he never got to finish. Now, sitting at that same kitchen table with the yellow envelope in front of me, I finally understood. He hadn't been planning a project, he'd been planning a safeguard. Thomas had always been 10 steps ahead, even when he didn't need to be. He used to say, "If I can make sure you'll never have to panic, I can rest easy." I guess that was his way of loving, quietly, practically, with backup copies of everything important. The day he died, the world shifted under me. But tonight, looking at that envelope, I could almost feel the ground settling again. Like maybe he'd built something under it just to make sure I wouldn't fall. The coffee was cold, but I didn't care. I got up, walked to his chair and sat down for the first time since he'd passed. It still creaked the same way, like it was adjusting to whoever sat there. For the first time, it didn't feel like a void. It felt like an invitation. I reached across the table and rested my hand on the envelope. It was heavier than it looked, or maybe that was just the weight of everything it represented. My chest tightened, but not from sadness. It was something closer to anticipation. The air in the room felt still again, like the moment before you open a door that's been locked for too long. I didn't move for a while. I just listened. To the house, to the silence, to the faint hum that still seemed to linger where he used to sit. Then I stood up, took a breath, and slid the envelope under my arm. The night outside was quiet, and for the first time in months, so was I. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon toast, something Lydia used to make when she was 12. I walked into the kitchen, half expecting to see her at the counter like old times. Instead, she stood there in a designer blazer, tapping her phone, the toaster popping behind her. "Morning, Mom," she said brightly. "I figured I'd make breakfast for us before I run a few errands." Her tone was cheerful, maybe too cheerful. The kind of happy people use when they've already decided something and don't want you to question it. I sat down, watching her spread butter with perfect precision. "You've been busy," I said. "Banks, papers, calls." She smiled without looking up. "You don't have to worry about any of that. I'm just tying up loose ends. You should relax. Maybe take a trip somewhere." I laughed softly. "And leave you with all the work? I'd feel guilty." Her eyes flicked toward me for half a second, quick, sharp, calculating, then softened. "You've earned it, Mom. Dad wanted you to enjoy life, not drown in forms and bills." It was a good line, too good. I watched her pour coffee, then text someone, then glance at the clock like she was waiting for the right time to escape the room. She looked put together, professional, not like the daughter who used to borrow my sweaters and forget to return them. When she left, I sat at the same kitchen table and stared at the toast she'd left untouched. I didn't eat it. Something about it felt staged, not poisoned, just practiced. Around noon, Sharon came by again, her voice full of concern and curiosity wrapped together like a ribbon. "Saw Lydia at the title office this morning," she said. "Didn't know you were selling the lake house." I blinked. "We're not." Sharon frowned. "Maybe I heard wrong, but she was with that realtor," the one who drives the white BMW. Looked serious. That was the first time my stomach dropped. I called Lydia. She didn't answer. I left a message. "Call me back, sweetheart. I just need to clarify something." By evening, she texted back. "At dinner with Eric's clients. Talk tomorrow." That night, I didn't sleep much. Every creak in the house felt louder. The wind against the siding, the clock ticking, the refrigerator hum. Everything sounded like the universe clearing its throat before telling me something I didn't want to hear. The next day, I decided to take a walk by the lake to clear my head. The air was crisp and the water looked calm. Deceptive, the way still water always is. I stopped by the property just out of habit, like checking on an old friend. A "for sale under contract" sign leaned against the mailbox. I froze. My throat went dry. The real estate company's logo stared back at me, bright red, almost smug. Underneath, someone had scribbled, "Congratulations" in marker. I stood there, clutching my coat tighter, trying to breathe. My first thought wasn't anger. It was disbelief, that after all the years, the scraped knees, the birthdays, the late-night talks, this was how it came full circle. I took out my phone and called the realtor's number from the sign. A young woman answered, cheerful and oblivious. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Cooper. I was just about to reach out. Lydia said you'd be out of town during the closing, but I wanted to confirm where to send the paperwork." My hand gripped the phone tighter. "I'm not out of town," I said, "and I didn't sign anything." There was silence. Then a hesitant, "Oh, I see. Well, that's strange. Lydia said she had full authorization. She promised to double-check and get back to me. She never did." When I got home, I found Lydia already there, packing some documents into her purse. She looked up casually. "Oh, hi, Mom. I didn't expect you back so soon." "I stopped by the lake," I said. My voice sounded calm, even though my pulse was hammering. "There's a sold sign. Her smile didn't falter. Yeah, we talked about it. You said keeping it was expensive. I said it was work, not that I wanted to sell it. She exhaled, annoyed. Mom, you don't need 2 houses. You barely drive anymore. Eric and I will use the money to invest. It's better for everyone. For everyone? I asked quietly. Or for you? Her eyes hardened, and the kindness melted off her face like cheap paint. You don't understand how money works. Dad handled everything, and now it's a mess. I'm fixing it. You should thank me. I didn't respond. I just looked at her. This stranger wearing my daughter's face, talking to me like I was an obstacle in her way. She grabbed her purse and walked toward the door. We'll talk later when you've calmed down, she said. When the door shut, I just stood there, feeling the weight of the air in the room shift. The pictures on the wall, Lydia's graduation, her wedding, our family Christmas, suddenly felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I poured myself a drink, not out of habit, but because silence can be too sharp without something to dull it. Then I sat down, picked up the yellow envelope again, and placed it right in front of me. If I'd learned anything from Thomas, it was that panic solves nothing. I took a slow breath, let it settle, and smiled just a little. Lydia thought she'd closed the deal, but she'd just opened something much bigger. The clock ticked, steady as ever. I reached for the letter opener and rested it against the edge of the envelope, feeling the paper tremble under my fingers, like it already knew what was coming. The blade of the letter opener hovered just above the flap of the envelope, but before I could tear it open, my phone buzzed again. Dr. Avery, 10:30 appointment reminder. I'd forgotten completely. I slid the envelope back into the drawer. Whatever was inside could wait a few hours. My doctor had been checking on me since Thomas died, worried I'd fallen into late-onset depression. I didn't feel depressed, just detached, like the world had turned down its volume and forgotten to turn it back up. At the clinic, the waiting room was packed. I sat between a man coughing into a napkin and a young mother trying to stop her toddler from eating a crayon. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. When I pulled out my phone, another message popped up. From Lydia. Don't stress today, Mom. Everything's handled. That emoji at the end made me laugh, a little too hard. Everything's handled. I was sitting in a clinic because my husband had died, and my daughter had just sold the house where we'd spent our lives. Sure, everything was handled. The nurse called my name. Inside the exam room, everything smelled like antiseptic and hand sanitizer. Dr. Avery smiled, warm as always. How are we holding up, Marianne? I told her I was fine, though I must have sounded like someone reading a script. She listened, nodded, then said gently, You're strong, you know that? But strength doesn't mean you stop needing people. That line hit harder than I expected, because the one person I thought I could still need had turned into the person I couldn't trust. After the appointment, I walked out into the parking lot and stood by the curb, realizing I didn't have a car anymore. Thomas's old Ford had been part of Lydia's clean-up. Sold along with my lake house and probably half my furniture if I checked. I stood there holding my purse, waiting for a bus that came once every 30 minutes. The wind was sharp, cutting through my jacket. That's when my phone rang again, Lydia's number. Mom, she said, sounding cheerful but rushed. Quick thing, the paperwork's done. The funds are being transferred tonight. You'll get your share soon. My share? Yes, we sold the house and the truck. I had to move fast, but it's done now. Eric and I leave for Europe tomorrow. It's a great opportunity. We'll be gone a few months. You can use the money to get something smaller, maybe a condo near Sharon. I stared at the horizon while she spoke, the words washing over me like static. I didn't interrupt. When she finished, I just said, Have a safe trip. That seemed to surprise her. She paused, then said, We love you, Mom. The line went dead. I stood there, still holding the phone, my reflection faint in the screen. Love. She said it like a formality, the same way a waiter says, Enjoy your meal after dropping off a check. The bus finally came. I climbed aboard, sat near the back, and watched the town blur past. Every block felt like a memory. The hardware store where Thomas bought nails for the deck, the cafe where Lydia once begged for pancakes after Sunday Mass, the florist who still kept my favourite lilies in stock. When I got home, I didn't cry. I made tea instead. Then I went straight to the bedroom, opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope again. The paper crinkled when I opened it, slow, deliberate, like Thomas's hand was still guiding mine. Inside were documents neatly folded, deeds, certificates, and a handwritten letter on yellowed paper. My breath caught, his handwriting all loops and slanted lines like he was still rushing to get home to me. "My dearest Marianne," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. But you're not alone." "Not really. You just don't know yet how well I've planned this." I laughed out loud. A soft, stunned laugh that sounded almost like a sob. "I've invested over the years in properties and stocks through Cooper Holdings, LLC. You might not recognize the name because I kept it separate. You're the sole owner now. Everything is in your name, including the apartment building where Lydia and Eric live." I blinked, reading it twice. "Don't be angry at her right away," he wrote. "She's young and ambitious, but blind to the value of loyalty. She'll learn. One day she'll come to you for help again, and when she does, you'll have the power to decide what family really means." I set the letter down, feeling a strange mix of warmth and disbelief. My husband, the man who used to balance checkbooks with a pencil, had somehow become a secret investor. The deeds listed everything: a downtown condo, the lake house, 3 rental properties in Madison, even a small motel near the coast. Lydia hadn't sold our lake house. She'd sold the listing, but not the ownership. Thomas had transferred it to the LLC years ago. I sat back, letting that realization sink in. Lydia thought she'd taken everything, but all she'd really done was announce her own downfall. When the kettle whistled, I poured another cup of tea and smiled into the steam. I could almost hear Thomas's voice again. "Let them think they've won. That's when they start making mistakes." That night, I gathered all the documents and placed them neatly on the kitchen table. I didn't need to call Lydia or accuse her. The truth had a way of moving on its own, quietly, efficiently, just like Thomas did. I flipped through the property deeds again, stopping at the one for the apartment building, the address where Lydia lived. My name was printed clearly at the bottom. Owner, Marianne Cooper. The irony was too perfect. I almost felt bad for her, almost. The streetlights outside flickered, catching the reflection of the letter on the table. For the first time in months, the silence in the house didn't feel heavy. It felt like company. I picked up the last page of his letter. The ink smudged where his hand must have brushed it. The final line read, "When you're ready, go see Howard Peterson. He'll know what to do." I traced the words with my finger. Howard Peterson, the lawyer who handled Thomas's will. Somewhere deep inside, I felt that familiar flicker of steadiness again. The kind that comes not from rage, but from knowing you're standing on solid ground while everyone else is about to sink. I folded the papers carefully, tucked them back into the envelope, and set it on the counter under the light. The lake shimmered through the window, calm and bright, as if it already knew I'd just found the map my husband left for the next chapter of our life. The next morning I stood in front of the mirror with my hair half pinned and my heart somewhere between disbelief and relief. Thomas's letter was still open on the dresser, and the sunlight hit it just enough to make his handwriting glow. I don't know how long I stared at it, maybe long enough to feel like he was still in the room. I picked up the letter again and read that last line. "Go see Howard Peterson. He'll know what to do." It felt like a command wrapped in love, so I decided to follow it. Peterson's office was downtown, the same place we'd gone years ago to sign our will. Back then, I'd barely paid attention, too busy joking with Thomas about how old we were getting. Now I understood why he'd insisted on keeping the man's number taped inside his desk drawer. The office smelled like polished wood and expensive coffee. Mr. Peterson looked up from behind a desk full of paperwork, and recognition spread across his face. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, standing quickly. "I wasn't expecting you, but it's good to see you." He gestured for me to sit. His tie was crooked, his smile polite but wary, the kind of man who never assumed good or bad news until the documents told him which it was. "I found something," I said, placing the envelope on his desk. "Thomas left me these before he passed. He said you'd know what to do." He adjusted his glasses, unfolded the papers, and started scanning. His brows lifted higher with each page. When he reached the end, he leaned back, exhaling a low whistle. "Your husband," he said slowly, "was a very clever man." "That's one way to put it," I said, sipping the coffee his assistant had handed me. He chuckled, still flipping through the deeds. You realize what this means, Mrs. Cooper? You're not just comfortably set, you're wealthy. The properties alone, the shares, this LLC is a fortress, and it's all in your name. I nodded. And the lake house? He tapped the file. Still legally yours. Lydia's sale was fraudulent. She never had authority. If you'd like, I can have it nullified by tomorrow. I hesitated. No lawsuits. Not yet. I want it handled quietly. He raised an eyebrow. Quietly? Yes, I want my daughter to think she's in control, just for a little longer. Peterson smiled, the kind of knowing smile lawyers get when they realize they're part of something more interesting than usual. Then you'll need to transfer the titles to yourself personally and freeze any secondary access to the accounts. I can help with that, discreetly. Do it, I said, and send me copies of everything, not digital. Paper. He scribbled a note. You sound just like Thomas. That made me laugh. God help me, I hope so. When I left his office, the city felt different, sharper somehow. People passed by with phones to their ears, horns blared, someone cursed about parking tickets, and through all of it, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. I stopped by a small bakery on the way home and bought a croissant, the kind Thomas used to love. I sat by the window, watching people rush through their lives, while I quietly rebuilt mine. Lydia had no idea she'd just handed me the perfect opportunity. Back at home, I placed the croissant on a plate and went to the closet where I kept a small box of Thomas's things, his watch, his pocket knife, an old keychain from our honeymoon. I tucked a copy of the letter in there too. Somehow it felt like putting a piece of him back where it belonged. Later that day, Sharon knocked on the door holding her dog on a leash. He got loose again, she said, laughing. Then her expression softened. You doing okay, honey? I heard about the sale. I smiled. Oh, that? Let's just say things aren't quite what they seem. Sharon tilted her head. That sounds mysterious. Let's call it strategic, she laughed. Well, I'll say this. Thomas married a woman who knows how to keep her cards close. After she left, I sat by the window again, the lawyer's folder spread open on the table. Each property had a name, an address, a purpose. Thomas had invested in quiet corners of the world. A motel near the coast, 2 rental duplexes, even a small vineyard in Door County. I smiled when I saw that one. He'd always wanted to retire near wine and water. Among the documents was a single page labelled Operating Agreement. In bold letters at the top, Cooper Holdings LLC, sole managing member, Marianne Cooper. I took a pen and signed where he'd left a blank line. Just my name, nothing fancy, just proof that I existed and understood what that meant now. The phone buzzed on the counter, another text from Lydia. Everything's done, Mom. You'll get your portion soon. Don't stress, okay? Europe is calling! I deleted it without replying. That night, as the sun dipped behind the trees, I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat on the porch. The lake glowed orange in the fading light, waves lapping softly against the dock. I remembered when Thomas and I first bought that land. Lydia had been 15, furious that we'd moved away from the city. She'd sulked for weeks until she realised the lake made for great selfies. Now she wanted to cash it in. I took a sip of wine and smiled to myself. The girl who'd once hated this house now thought she'd sold it. The irony would have made Thomas laugh. The air grew cooler, and I pulled the cardigan tighter around my shoulders. Inside, the documents were stacked neatly in their envelope, everything labelled, everything secure. For the first time since his funeral, I felt something close to gratitude. Not just for what Thomas left behind, but for how well he'd known me. He'd trusted that, when the time came, I'd know exactly how to use it. The night fell completely and I stayed there a while, listening to the frogs by the shore and the faint echo of the wind against the windows. There was nothing left to say, no need for revenge speeches or promises, just quiet understanding that some battles aren't fought with anger or noise, but with patience, paperwork, and the confidence of knowing you've already won. Inside, the clock ticked steady against the wall, the same rhythm it had the day he died. Only this time, I didn't hear loss in it. I heard direction. The next few days moved with a strange kind of clarity. Every morning I woke up before sunrise, brewed coffee in Thomas's old French press, and spread the legal papers across the kitchen table. Each page looked more like armour than paperwork. I wasn't reading numbers anymore. I was reading power. Howard Peterson called just after 9. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, his voice smooth and calm. "Everything's been transferred into your personal trust. The LLC is fully under your control. No one, not even your daughter, can touch it." I stirred sugar into my cup, smiling at the steam. "Good. Keep it quiet. I don't want Lydia knowing anything." He paused. "I figured as much. She's already called the title office twice asking for updates on the sale." That made me laugh. Not a cruel laugh, just an honest one. "Oh, I bet she has. Let her think she's the hero in her own story for now. It'll make the ending more poetic." Peterson chuckled softly. "You remind me of your husband. He once told me, 'Marianne has more patience than any judge in this county.' Patience is just the fancy word for waiting until everyone else makes their mistakes," I said, taking a sip. I could almost hear him smiling through the phone. "Then I suppose you'll be pleased to know Lydia's mistake is already showing. She signed a false affidavit for that sale. I'm having it reversed through the circuit court. No lawsuit, no noise, just paperwork." "You're earning every penny, Mr. Peterson." "Please, call me Howard. We're in this together now." When the call ended, I set the mug down and looked around the house. The same beige walls, the same curtains, the same pictures of Lydia as a child grinning in pigtails. I should have felt sad, but I didn't. What I felt was steady, like standing in the middle of a storm and realizing it's finally passing around you, not through you. That afternoon, I drove into town in a rental car Peterson had arranged for me. I needed to visit the notary to finalize a few signatures. The clerk, a young man barely out of college, looked at me like I was somebody's grandmother paying a phone bill. When he saw the property records, his eyes widened. "You own all of this?" I smiled politely. "Apparently I do." He blinked, probably wondering how a woman in a cardigan and loafers had just signed for half the block. I didn't explain. Afterward, I stopped by the grocery store. Sharon was there, of course. She always managed to appear where gossip was likely to bloom. "Marianne!" she called out, pushing her cart with that exaggerated enthusiasm people get when they're fishing for information. "Heard from Lydia lately?" I dropped a carton of eggs into my basket. "She's in Europe now. New business venture." Sharon's eyebrows lifted. "Fancy. I saw her at the bank last week, looking stressed." "I'm sure she'll be fine," I said evenly. "She always lands on her feet, sometimes on other people's feet, but still." Sharon laughed, clearly unsure if it was safe to join me in that joke. "You always did have a sharp tongue," I smiled. "It's hereditary." That night, I cooked a small dinner and ate by the window. The lake outside shimmered with reflected moonlight, soft and unbothered. Somewhere between bites, I realized something important. I didn't hate Lydia. I pitied her, because one day she'd wake up and realize the thing she'd tried to take wasn't money. It was dignity. And dignity can't be stolen. The next morning, Howard dropped by with a folder. "You'll want to see this," he said, setting it on the counter. "Your husband left detailed notes about each property, even rental ledgers." He was meticulous. I opened the folder, flipping through pages of handwritten lists. Each line was neat, organized, with Thomas's small quirks, circles around due dates, little arrows pointing to notes like "fix leak before tenants complain" or "buy Marianne more time to rest." Then there was a page labelled Lake House. Under it he'd written, "This is her heart. Protect it at all costs." My throat tightened. He really did think of everything, didn't he? Howard nodded. "He even predicted this exact situation, said you might need these deeds to remind her who raised her." I ran my hand across the paper. He knew her too well. Howard closed his briefcase. "I'll keep monitoring the accounts. She'll be back eventually. And people like that always circle home when the world stops applauding." When he left, I stood at the window again, watching the wind move across the lake. He was right. Lydia would come back, not because she missed me, but because that's how the story always goes. The selfish always find their way home when the consequences catch up. Later that night, while washing dishes, I thought about the years I'd spent teaching Lydia about honesty and hard work. How I used to make her earn her allowance by helping at the community library. She'd roll her eyes saying, "You don't have to make everything a life lesson, Mom." Turns out I did, and apparently the lesson stuck. Just not the one I intended. The phone buzzed again, a text this time. Mom, Eric and I extended our trip. "Don't worry, everything's fine." I turned off the faucet and stared at the bubbles sliding down the drain. There it was again. That word. Fine. The universal term for I'm lying. I wiped my hands and picked up the phone. I typed back, "Good. Enjoy it while it lasts." Then I hit send and smiled. The following morning, I visited the post office to register my trust documents. The clerk stamped them twice, slid them back, and said, "You're all set, Mrs. Cooper. All set." I like the sound of that. Outside, the sky was overcast, grey clouds rolling across the water. I stood there for a minute, the wind tugging at my scarf. Thomas used to say the weather always matched my moods. Today it didn't. The sky looked like trouble, but I felt calm. When I got home, I poured myself another coffee and set the folder on the table. Everything Thomas had built, everything Lydia thought she'd erased, was now back where it belonged. I leaned back in the chair, the same one he used to sit in every morning, and looked around the room. The lake house was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It felt alive, like it was waiting for something, maybe even me, to take charge again. The kettle whistled softly, and I reached for my cup. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and fresh paper. I smiled without meaning to, because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't reacting to life. I was steering it. The next few weeks moved quietly, the way a calm lake hides a strong current. To everyone else, I was still the grieving widow with too much time and too little family. But behind my curtains, something else was happening. I was becoming a woman with a plan. Howard handled the paperwork faster than I expected. The beach house title reverted back under my trust, the apartment building was secured, and all the accounts Lydia thought she controlled were legally frozen. On paper, she had power over nothing. In her head, she still believed she had it all. That was the beauty of silence. When people underestimate you, they leave the door wide open. I started noticing things differently. Neighbours would stop by to check in, but what they really wanted was gossip. Aurora, the woman from 3 houses down, showed up one morning holding banana bread and curiosity. "I heard Lydia's in Europe," she said, handing me the loaf. "How long's she staying?" I smiled politely. Depends how long the credit cards last." She laughed, a little awkwardly. "You're funny, Marianne. I always thought you were too quiet for sarcasm." "I'm learning," I said, slicing the bread. "Life's a good teacher." After she left, I froze half the loaf and set the rest on the counter. I wasn't hungry, but the house smelled warm again. Thomas would have said I was nesting. He used to tease me about how I needed order before peace. I suppose he was right, but this time order came with legal contracts. That afternoon, I decided to walk down to the pier. The lake had that glassy stillness that looks fragile but isn't. A man was fishing near the dock. Grey beard, windbreaker, a portable radio playing country music low enough to blend with the breeze. "You're out early," he said when I passed. "Old habits," I replied. "Married woman like you shouldn't walk alone," he said, half joking. "Widowed woman like me's got nothing to lose," I answered, smiling. He laughed, nodded, and tipped his cap. "Fair enough, ma'am." That moment felt small but grounding. Ordinary. And ordinary was something I hadn't felt in months. When I got home, there was an envelope on the porch, plain, no return address. Inside was a copy of a court order reversing the sale of the lake house. At the bottom, a note from Howard. "Everything is officially yours again. No one needs to know." I sat down on the steps, reading the document twice. No fireworks, no shouting, just quiet finality. Lydia's theft was undone. The house, the land, the car, every piece of what she tried to erase was back in my hands. And yet, I didn't feel triumphant, just settled. That night, I opened the window in our bedroom and let the cold air in. The smell of pine and lake water filled the room. I found myself talking to Thomas again, softly. "You really thought of everything, didn't you? You knew she'd do something like this." The floorboards creaked under my feet, the same sound they made when he used to pace during phone calls. I smiled. "You'd tell me to keep calm. Wait it out. I can hear you now. Don't fight the storm, honey. Let it blow itself out." I wasn't fighting anymore. I was waiting. The next morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to hide behind paperwork forever. I wanted to see what Lydia's world looked like now that she thought she'd won. I took the train into the city. Her apartment building, my apartment building, stood tall and modern, all glass and marble, like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The concierge recognised me from years ago when I helped Lydia move in. "Mrs. Cooper," he said warmly. "It's been a while." It has, I said. How are things here? He shrugged. Well, Mrs. Wallace, your daughter, she's been gone a few weeks. They said something about Europe. The rent payments came in late last month, but I guess travel can do that. I smiled thinly. Yes, travel does that. Before I left, I asked if I could see the maintenance records. Just routine checks, I told him. He handed me the clipboard without question. As I flipped through, I noticed the balance sheets, the management fees, and the apartment number Lydia had claimed as her own. All the notes said the same thing: owner, Cooper Holdings, LLC. I took a photo of the page, thanked him, and walked out with the kind of quiet satisfaction you don't brag about. You savour it. On the ride home, the train rocked gently, the scenery rolling by in a blur of trees and rooftops. My reflection in the window looked different, sharper, calmer, older, but not defeated. Lydia's betrayal had carved something new into me, patience with edges. Back home, I made tea and called Howard. Everything's confirmed, I said. She's still living in my building, paying rent to me without realising it. He chuckled. That's poetic justice, if I've ever seen it. I don't want to collect on her yet, I said. Let her keep her illusion. It's more valuable than rent. He paused. You've got a sharp sense of irony, Mrs. Cooper. I learned from the best, I said. Later that night, I found myself writing a note, not to send, just to clear my thoughts. When people show you who they are, don't argue. Just take notes. I folded it and slipped it inside the old journal Thomas had given me years ago. On the first page, in his handwriting, were the words, "In calm waters, you can still build a bridge." I traced those words with my thumb and smiled. Calm waters. That's what this was. A comeback that didn't need noise, only time. As the moon rose over the lake, I sat by the window with the lights off. The reflection on the glass showed a woman who'd been broken, yes, but not beaten. And somewhere across the ocean, my daughter still thought she had the upper hand. The first snow arrived early that year, soft flakes drifting across the lake like feathers. I watched from the window with a cup of tea in hand, the world outside hushed and white. Somewhere in Europe, Lydia was probably drinking champagne, smiling for pictures and posting captions about new beginnings. Howard had told me to expect silence for a while. People like her only call when the storm hits, he said. I didn't ask when he thought that would be. Storms come on their own schedule. It was 3 weeks later when the first crack appeared. Aurora stopped by with her usual flair for gossip. She walked in with snow still clinging to her boots and a look that said she couldn't wait to share. You didn't hear this from me, she began, which of course meant I was about to hear it directly from her. But someone at the bank told my husband that Lydia's husband, what's his name? Eric, right? He's in trouble. I raised an eyebrow. Trouble? She leaned in. Apparently he used their condo as collateral for some kind of business loan. Big one. Except, she lowered her voice, the property isn't legally his. I kept my face calm, but inside the pieces clicked together like a puzzle snapping into place. Lydia and Eric had built their little empire on air, and now gravity was doing its job. Poor kids, I said softly, almost convincing myself I meant it. That night, I opened my laptop, something I rarely did since Thomas passed, and searched their names. The first result was a business article about Wallace Global Ventures defaulting on payments, then another about possible legal disputes. I closed the laptop, finished my tea, and stared at the flickering light on the ceiling. Thomas would have said it best. You can't run from math. Numbers always balance themselves. A few days later, I was at the grocery store when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Mom? The voice was shaky, barely audible over what sounded like an airport. Lydia? She sniffed, then exhaled sharply. Eric's gone. He left. He took everything. Our accounts, the money from the sale. Well, what was left of it? He's with someone else. I leaned against the cart handle. I see. She started crying. I didn't know what he was doing. I trusted him. I thought the investment would work out. Now the bank's after me. They're saying the condo isn't ours. I don't understand how. You don't understand, I interrupted gently, because you never asked the right questions. There was silence. Then a small broken sound, part sob, part exhale. Can I come home? Just for a while? Of course, I said, keeping my tone even. Home's still here. When she arrived 2 days later, she looked nothing like the confident woman who had sold my house out from under me. Her hair was limp, her eyes hollow, her clothes wrinkled like she'd slept in them. She clutched a single suitcase and stood on the porch as if unsure whether she was welcome. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. I opened the door wider. "You look tired." She nodded. "Can I come in?" I said, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, her eyes darting around the living room. It was the same house she'd once dismissed as too old-fashioned, now looking like shelter from a storm she'd built herself. I made tea while she sat at the kitchen table. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I messed up, didn't I?" I poured the tea carefully. "We all do." "No, Mom. I mean, really messed up. I lost everything." I sat across from her. "You didn't lose everything. You just lost what you shouldn't have taken in the first place." She looked up, her lip trembling. "I didn't mean to hurt you. Eric said it was temporary. He said it was smart to move things fast." "Fast," I repeated. "That's what people say when they don't want time to think." Her eyes welled up again. "I just wanted to make things easier for us." "Easier for who?" She didn't answer. Instead, she buried her face in her hands and cried. Not polite tears this time, but deep, choking sobs that shook her shoulders. I didn't move to comfort her. Not yet. Some lessons had to be felt all the way through. When she finally lifted her head, her mascara streaked, she whispered, "I don't deserve your kindness." I met her eyes. "Probably not, but you'll get it anyway." She blinked, confused. "I'm not doing this for you," I said quietly. "I'm doing it for me. I don't want bitterness in this house. I've lived long enough to know it poisons everything." She wiped her face and nodded slowly, as if trying to process mercy she hadn't earned. I gave her a blanket, set her up in the guest room, and left her alone. Later, when I passed by, I saw her sitting on the edge of the bed staring at her phone, no doubt scrolling through the wreckage of her old life. In the days that followed, she tried to help around the house. She cooked once, badly, and folded laundry like she was solving a math problem. I didn't correct her. She needed to feel useful. One evening, as I washed dishes, she came into the kitchen and said, "Mom, I got a job." I turned off the faucet. "Oh, cleaning offices downtown. Night shift. It's not much, but it's something." I nodded. "Work is work. I'm glad you found something." She smiled faintly, and for the first time in years, it looked real, small, tired, but honest. After she went to bed, I stood at the window, the reflection of the lake shimmering in the dark. I thought about how life has a strange way of teaching humility, not through punishment, but through persistence. Lydia was learning now, one night shift at a time, what real work felt like. And maybe that was better than anything I could have planned. The next morning, I left an envelope by her coffee mug before she woke up. Inside was a small amount of cash, just enough to help her breathe, not enough to save her. On the note I'd written, "For groceries, not shortcuts." When she came down and found it, she looked at me, tears in her eyes again. But this time I saw something different in them, something human. She whispered, "Thank you, Mom." I nodded, pouring my coffee. "Don't thank me, just use it wisely." The lake outside glimmered faintly in the morning light. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like balance, quiet, steady, and right where it belonged. The following evening, I was on the porch with a blanket over my knees, watching the lights flicker across the lake, when a soft knock came at the door. Lydia stood there in her work clothes, plain grey slacks, hair tied back, a badge clipped to her shirt. She looked smaller somehow, not in size but in presence, like the world had finally sanded down all the sharp edges she used to cut people with. "I didn't want to wake you," she said quietly, "but I just got off work. And I didn't want to go straight to bed." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee's still warm." She followed me in, her shoes squeaking against the floor. I poured her a cup and sat across from her. She didn't speak for a while. Her hands trembled slightly as she stirred sugar into the mug. "I cleaned 14 offices tonight," she finally said. 14. My knees are killing me." She gave a small laugh, almost embarrassed. "Do you know how many people leave their trash cans overflowing with takeout boxes? Like they've never heard of respect." "Most people only respect what they think they own," I said, sipping my coffee. She nodded slowly, the words hitting her somewhere deeper than she expected. "Yeah," she murmured. "I guess I used to be one of them." Silence stretched between us, comfortable this time, Outside, the wind picked up, tapping the shutters. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes for a second, looking utterly spent. "Mom," she said, her voice softer now, "I found something in Eric's things when I was packing. I didn't know whether to tell you." I raised an eyebrow. "What did you find?" She pulled a small white envelope from her purse. "It was inside his jacket pocket. It had your name on it. I didn't open it." I took it carefully. The handwriting wasn't Eric's. My chest tightened when I saw the signature on the back, T.C. Thomas Cooper, my husband's initials. I looked up at her. "You said you found this in Eric's things?" She nodded. "I swear. I didn't know it was there. Maybe he took it when we were sorting your files last year." I didn't answer. I turned the envelope over in my hands, the paper yellowed at the corners. Inside was a small key and a note written in Thomas's familiar script. "If you're reading this, it's because someone misplaced their integrity. The key opens box 312 at Shoreline Bank. Use it wisely, not emotionally. It's not revenge, it's a reminder." Lydia leaned forward. "What does it mean?" "It means," I said, folding the note carefully, "your father knew more than we thought." She stared at me, confusion and guilt twisting together on her face. "You think he knew what I'd do?" "I think he knew what people are capable of when they confuse love with entitlement." She flinched slightly, then nodded. "That sounds like him." I didn't press further. She looked tired, and there was no need to make her carry the weight of every truth in one night. I placed the key on the counter beside the letter and stood to refill our cups. When I turned around, she was looking at the old photos on the wall, her graduation picture, our family trip to Michigan, Thomas in his fishing hat smiling at the camera. She whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know how I became this person." "By not paying attention," I said gently. She turned toward me, eyes red but steady. "I want to do better, Mom." "Then start small," I said. "Take care of yourself. Earn what you spend. Stop trying to fix everything fast." "Fast is what ruined you." Her chin trembled, but she nodded. "I will." I handed her the second cup of coffee and sat down again. We didn't talk after that. We just drank in silence while the wind pressed against the windows. For the first time, there was no tension, no pretending, no old roles of mother and daughter fighting for control. Just two people sharing warmth in the middle of winter. When she finally stood to go to bed, she paused in the doorway. "Mom," she said, "thank you for not throwing me out." "I didn't need to," I said, giving a faint smile. "Life already did." She almost smiled back. "Fair enough." After she went upstairs, I sat alone for a long time, looking at the little brass key glinting under the kitchen light. Thomas's words echoed in my head. "Use it wisely, not emotionally." The next morning, I drove to Shoreline Bank. The same marble floors, the same faint smell of ink and carpet cleaner. The manager recognized my name immediately and led me to a small private room. When I turned the key and opened the safety deposit box, I didn't know what I expected. Maybe papers, maybe another letter. Inside was a small velvet pouch and another note. For when she learns, not before. I untied the pouch and poured its contents onto the table. Jewellery, our family's heirlooms, and a few new pieces I didn't recognise, likely investments Thomas had made quietly. There was enough to cover every debt Lydia could have racked up and still have a future left over. The note continued, "This is her second chance. Let her think she's earning it. That's how lessons stick." I sat there for a long time, my hands folded over the note, the jewellery glittering faintly in the morning light. My throat felt tight, not from sadness, but from awe. Thomas hadn't just protected me. He'd built a path for our daughter to walk back home without losing her dignity. When I returned home, Lydia was cleaning the kitchen, humming quietly under her breath. It was the same song Thomas used to hum, slow, steady, without rush. I watched her for a moment before placing the velvet pouch on the counter. "Your father left this. I think it's meant for both of us." She froze, then looked up, unsure what to say. I smiled faintly. "But we'll open it together. Later. After you've had a little more time." She nodded, her expression thoughtful, and went back to wiping the counter. The air between us felt lighter than it had in years. I picked up the key again, placed it in my pocket, and stepped outside for a moment. The lake shimmered in the midday sun, the ice beginning to crack where the water ran deepest. It wasn't the kind of thaw you could see in a day, but it was starting, slow, steady, inevitable. And for the first time since Thomas died, I realised that healing could sound exactly like silence. Steam rose from the mug in my hands as I stood at the window, watching Lydia walk down the driveway toward the mailbox. She had on Thomas's old flannel jacket, the one she used to mock him for wearing. It hung loose on her, sleeves too long, but she didn't seem to care. She bent to pick up the morning mail and waved when she saw me watching. It had been almost a month since she'd moved back in. The rhythm of the house had changed in small but noticeable ways. She was still up before me most mornings, making oatmeal instead of coffee, humming softly while she washed the dishes. She never talked about Eric anymore. I didn't ask. There was no need. When she came back inside, she handed me the mail and smiled. "Mostly bills and one letter for you from the city." I opened it carefully. It was a notice about property taxes for the old beach house, the one she'd tried to sell, except now it was listed under my trust. She glanced at the page and froze when she saw the address. "You kept it?" she asked quietly. "I never lost it," I replied. Her face flushed. "Mom, I didn't." I held up a hand. "I know what you did, and I also know you've been paying me rent without realising it." Her mouth fell open. "What?" "The apartment building you and Eric lived in was mine. It still is. You've been sending checks to my LLC for years." She stared at me, stunned. "You knew?" "Your father knew first," I said. "He set it up that way. I just made sure the paperwork stayed clean." For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she laughed, a weak, shaky laugh that sounded like surrender. "So all this time, you've been, watching me fall on my face?" "No," I said calmly. "I've been watching you stand up." She sat down, resting her forehead in her hands. "I don't know if I should thank you or hate you. Either way, you're learning," I said. And that's what he wanted. She lifted her head, eyes red but clearer than I'd seen in years. "He really planned all of this, didn't he?" "Thomas never did anything halfway," I said, smiling faintly. That afternoon, Lydia asked if she could drive out to the beach house with me. I agreed. The drive was quiet. The kind of quiet that sits comfortably between two people who finally understand they don't need to fill every space with words. When we arrived, the cottage looked just as it always had. Cream-coloured siding, shutters a little faded, the smell of pine and lake air thick and familiar. She stood by the porch, running her fingers along the railing. "I used to hate this place," she said softly. "Thought it was boring. Too quiet. Now I'd give anything for this kind of peace." "Peace comes with honesty," I said, "and work." Inside, the house was tidy but worn. Old furniture, family photos still on the mantel. Lydia picked up one of the frames, a picture of Thomas grilling burgers while she and I laughed behind him. "He looks so young here," she said, her voice catching. "He was. So were we." She smiled sadly, then wandered into the next room. I followed and found her standing by the window overlooking the lake. "You should do something with this place," she said. "It's too good to just sit empty." "I was thinking the same thing," I replied. We stood there in silence, the lake stretching endlessly before us, sunlight shimmering off the surface. The idea came so naturally it almost didn't feel like a decision. "You remember Dad's old idea?" I asked. "He used to talk about opening a place where people could rest, not a hotel, just a home for people who'd lost their footing." Her eyes brightened. "Like a shelter?" "Yes, something small, local, for women trying to start over." She turned toward me, the corner of her mouth twitching into a faint smile. "You'd actually do that?" "I already have the property, the funds and the time," I said. "What I need is help." She hesitated, then nodded. "I could help. I mean, I'm not exactly a role model, but I know what hitting rock bottom feels like." "That's exactly why you'd be perfect for it," I said. "You can teach from experience." She looked at me for a long moment, then exhaled. "You know, Mom, I used to think you were weak. Always so forgiving, so calm. I thought it made you easy to walk over. And now I think it's the scariest kind of strength there is." I smiled. "You're late to the party, but I'll take it." We spent the rest of the day cleaning the cottage, sweeping out cobwebs, dusting shelves, airing out old linens. Lydia found an old radio and turned it on. Static at first, then soft jazz filled the room. It felt almost like Thomas was there, humming along while we worked. By evening, we sat on the porch watching the sunset. The air smelled like salt and old wood, the sound of waves breaking softly against the shore. Lydia leaned back, eyes half closed. It feels different here, she said, like it's waiting for something good to happen. Maybe it already is, I replied. She smiled faintly, her expression calm. You know, Mom, I think Dad would have liked this. I think he planned it for this exact moment, I said. She looked at me, curious. You mean the shelter? I nodded. No, this, you and me, sitting here, talking like people who finally get each other. Lydia's gaze dropped to her hands. You really forgive me? I reached over, resting my hand on hers. Forgiveness isn't a gift, Lydia. It's an agreement. You live better, and I'll let the past rest. She squeezed my hand, her grip trembling slightly. Deal. The sun dipped below the horizon, the sky blushing gold and pink. For the first time in years, the air between us didn't feel heavy. It felt open, like maybe this place, this old house by the lake, wasn't just a memory anymore. It was beginning. When we drove back that night, the headlights stretched across the dark road and Lydia hummed quietly to herself. I didn't recognize the tune, but it was soft and hopeful, the kind of sound you only make when you finally remember how to breathe again. The following week, the house by the lake buzzed with quiet purpose. Lydia and I made lists, supplies, furniture, permits, everything it would take to turn a forgotten home into something alive again. I hadn't seen her this focused in years. She kept a notebook filled with neat handwriting and little doodles in the margins, as if she was reclaiming some version of herself she'd misplaced along the way. We called it Haven by the Lake. Not a shelter, not a charity, just a home for women who needed somewhere to land while life stopped spinning. Lydia came up with the name. She said it sounded like peace. One morning, she came into the kitchen holding a box of old paperwork. Mom, I found the deed transfers. Dad added a clause I've never seen before. She slid the papers toward me. The clause stated that any future sale or lease of the property required a written statement of community purpose. Thomas had made sure that this home could never again be turned into a profit scheme. I smiled. He always did like having the last word. Lydia laughed softly. He really did. We spent the next few days gathering furniture from local donations. Neighbours helped. People I hadn't spoken to in years showed up with boxes, blankets and encouragement. It turned out word of our project had spread faster than we thought. One woman, a single mother named Clarissa, brought coffee every morning and said, "My sister could have used a place like this 5 years ago." Lydia listened quietly to her stories, eyes full of empathy. Later she whispered to me, "I think I finally understand what this place means." "It means second chances," I said, "for everyone." By the end of the month, the cottage was transformed. The old living room became a shared space with bookshelves and a fireplace. The spare rooms were turned into small, simple bedrooms. Clean beds, white curtains, nothing fancy but everything kind. Lydia painted the walls herself, humming while she worked. When the first 2 residents arrived, a middle-aged woman named June escaping a bad marriage and a young woman named Tara trying to restart her life after losing her job, Lydia greeted them at the door with that same gentle confidence I hadn't seen in years. She helped carry their bags inside, offered tea, and showed them their rooms. After they'd settled, I stood in the hallway watching her. The woman who once measured worth in money was now handing out comfort like it was free air. That night, we sat on the porch again, the air cool and quiet. Lydia wrapped her hands around her mug and said, "I didn't think I could do anything good again. Not after everything I did." "Good isn't something you become once," I said. "It's something you practice." She nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the lake. "I wish Dad could see this." "He can," I said softly. "You're living proof." The moonlight reflected off the water, casting ripples of silver across her face. She looked peaceful, maybe for the first time since she was a child. The next morning, a letter arrived addressed to the Cooper family estate. Inside was a simple message from the local community board. "Congratulations. Your property's application for non-profit community use has been approved." Lydia held the letter like it was made of gold. "We're official?" "We're official," I said, smiling. We spent that afternoon celebrating with the small group of volunteers who'd helped us. Clarissa brought cupcakes, June played old songs on the radio, and Tara decorated the porch with string lights. Lydia laughed more than I'd heard her laugh in years. She looked like herself again, not the woman who'd schemed and stumbled, but the girl who used to dance barefoot on this very porch when she was 16. When everyone had gone home, I stayed behind to clean up. Lydia joined me after a while, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed me one and said, "You know, Mom, I've been thinking. I don't want to leave." I raised an eyebrow. "Leave where?" "Here. The house. The project. Everything. I want to keep doing this with you. I don't want to go back to the city." I took a slow sip of tea. "I wasn't going to ask you to leave." She smiled faintly. I figured. Still, I needed to say it out loud. We sat together in the dim glow of the porch lights, the sound of crickets filling the spaces between us. Lydia reached into her pocket and pulled out the small velvet pouch Thomas had left in the safety box. She placed it on the table between us. "I think it's time," she said. I untied the string. Inside were 2 gold rings, plain and smooth. Thomas's note lay folded beneath them. "For the women who learn that love is not control and forgiveness is not surrender." Lydia traced her finger over the words, tears glinting in her eyes. "He really knew everything, didn't he?" "He didn't know everything," I said gently. "He just believed we'd find our way back." She nodded, silent for a long while. Then she said, "You know, Mom, I used to think revenge meant getting even, making someone pay, but now I think it just means choosing peace in a world that expects you to stay angry." "That's a wiser definition than most people ever reach," I said. She smiled, looking out over the water. "Guess I had good teachers." The night deepened around us, but the air didn't feel cold anymore. It felt still, alive, like the house itself was breathing. When we finally stood to go inside, Lydia stopped and looked back at the lake. "You think Dad would be proud of us?" "I think he already is," I said. She nodded slowly, her face lit softly by the porch light, her expression calm and sure. The woman who'd once brought destruction into my life was now helping rebuild something bigger than either of us. As we walked back inside, I caught the faint scent of pine and the distant sound of the water lapping against the dock. The walls seemed to hum quietly with memory, not of pain, but of renewal. And for the first time, I realized the house didn't just belong to me or Lydia anymore. It belonged to every woman who would walk through that door and rediscover her own strength. The first snow of January came earlier than expected that year. Lydia was stacking logs by the porch when my phone rang. The number had a Paris country code. I stared at it for a few seconds before answering. A woman's voice came through, polite but detached. "Mrs. Cooper, I'm calling from the American consulate. We're contacting you about a man named Eric Dalton. Is he known to you?" I felt my chest tighten. "He used to be my son-in-law." "There's been an incident," she said. "He's currently in French custody. Multiple fraud charges, including falsified investment documents and identity theft. He listed your daughter as his business partner." My heart sank. "Is she implicated?" "Not at this time," the woman replied. "It seems her signature was forged. We'll forward legal documents to confirm her exoneration. We just wanted to notify you since her name appeared frequently in the file." I thanked her, hung up, and leaned against the counter. The relief came in waves, chased by something heavier. Closure, maybe, or just the realization that some endings write themselves. Lydia came in, brushing snow from her sleeves. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "It's Eric," I said. "He's been arrested." Her eyes widened, then softened. "For what? For being himself," I said. "Fraud, identity theft, all the usual tricks." She didn't react at first. She just stood there, quiet, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing. Then, after a moment, she exhaled. "Guess Karma really does have a passport." That made me laugh, just enough to break the heaviness of the moment. She joined me, shaking her head. "You think it's wrong to feel relieved?" "No," I said. "It's human. But don't mistake relief for revenge. They're not the same thing." "I know," she said softly. "I don't want revenge anymore." That night, she sat by the fireplace, staring at the flames. I watched her from the kitchen, remembering the woman she used to be, the one who thought money could buy safety, the one who saw me as an obstacle instead of a mother. That woman was gone now, burned away by consequences. The next morning, she placed an envelope on the table. Inside was a printout of the legal notice from France. "I want to frame it," she said with a wry smile, "as a reminder of who I used to trust." "Maybe put it in the closet instead," I said. "You don't need reminders of pain once you've learned the lesson." She nodded and tucked it away. That same week, Haven by the Lake received its first newspaper feature. A small local paper ran a story titled, "Mother and Daughter Turn Family Home into Refuge of Hope." They'd sent a photographer who took pictures of Lydia helping June repaint one of the rooms. In the photo, her hair was pulled back, paint on her cheek, laughing mid-sentence. She looked free. The next morning, we woke to messages flooding in. Emails from local women asking if there were openings, small businesses offering donations, and one letter from a woman in Ohio who wrote, "Your story gave me courage to leave. Thank you." Lydia read it out loud, then folded it carefully. "I want to keep this one," she said. "It feels sacred." "It is," I said. From then on, she handled the daily operations of the shelter with a quiet discipline that reminded me of her father. She made lists, budgets, schedules, and still found time to sit with the residents in the evenings, listening more than she spoke. One evening, as I was locking up, June pulled me aside. "Your daughter's something else," she said. "She talks to us like equals. You can tell she's been through her own storm." "She has," I replied, "and she finally stopped trying to outrun the rain." June smiled. "That's how you know she's healed." Later that night, I found Lydia sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a blank page in her notebook. "What's on your mind?" I asked. "I've been thinking about starting a program here," she said, "for financial literacy. Teach women how to protect themselves legally and financially, so they don't get trapped like I did." "That's a wonderful idea." She looked up at me, eyes serious. "Would you help me design it?" "Of course," I said, "but you'll be the one teaching. You've lived the lesson." Her expression softened. "You really think I can?" "I don't think," I said. "I know." The following weeks blurred into a rhythm. Early mornings at the house, afternoons filled with paperwork, evenings around the fire with the residents. Each woman brought her own story, and somehow, in the sharing, Lydia found her purpose again. One Saturday, as we prepared for a small open house, Lydia handed me a stack of flyers. On the front was the new slogan she'd come up with. "Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means learning to live wiser." I traced the words with my fingers and smiled. "You wrote this?" She nodded. "It's what Dad used to tell me when I made mistakes. You can cry, but you'd better learn while you're at it." I laughed. Sounds exactly like him. The open house was a success. The local mayor stopped by, reporters took photos, and by evening, the place was buzzing with energy. As the last guests left, I stood by the porch railing watching Lydia talk to a group of volunteers. Her posture was confident, her voice clear, her laughter easy. It struck me then, she wasn't the same woman who'd once stolen from me. She wasn't even the same woman who'd come back begging for shelter. She was someone new, built from the rubble of her own mistakes, stronger and quieter for it. As I looked out over the lake, the reflection of the house lights shimmered across the water like a string of lanterns. The sound of laughter drifted from inside, and I realized something that made my chest ache with quiet gratitude. Thomas hadn't just saved our family financially. He'd saved our humanity. He'd given us the one thing money could never buy, a reason to start again with grace. When I walked back inside, Lydia looked up and smiled. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I said. "It feels like home again." She nodded, glancing around the room. "Yeah, it really does." The firelight flickered across her face, warm and steady, and in that moment I saw not the daughter who betrayed me, but the woman her father always knew she could become. The air smelled of pine and salt that morning as Lydia and I stood by the lake, hanging white lanterns along the porch rail. The house buzzed with quiet energy. June was in the kitchen baking pies, Tara arranging flowers, and Clarissa tuning a borrowed guitar for the evening gathering. Haven by the Lake had been open 6 months, and today we were celebrating something bigger than success. We were celebrating survival. Lydia held up a lantern, squinting at it. "Do you think Dad would have approved of this?" I smiled. "He would have told you to hang it straight, then asked who was paying for the light bulbs." She laughed. That easy, genuine kind of laugh that used to fill this porch years ago. It warmed me more than the sunlight. "I miss him," she said quietly. "So do I answered. "But I think he's here, in every second chance this place gives." By noon, cars began pulling into the gravel driveway. Neighbours, donors and women who had once stayed at the shelter came carrying casseroles, flowers and framed photos of their new lives. Some had kids with them, tugging at their hands, calling out, "Miss Lydia!" as they ran across the yard. Lydia bent down to hug each one. Her voice was gentle but steady, her posture sure. No trace of the fragile woman who'd once come home broken. Just grace, calm and earned. I watched from the porch steps, my chest full. When Clarissa brought me a cup of lemonade, she said, "Your daughter's a powerhouse, you know that?" "She always was," I said. "She just needed a reason to use her strength for something that lasts." At the ceremony, Lydia took the small stage we'd built from old porch wood. Her voice carried across the water. "6 months ago, I was lost. I'd burned bridges I didn't think could be rebuilt. But this house, this community, taught me that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about deciding who you want to be after it." The crowd listened in silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She continued, her eyes glistening. "I used to think love meant control. That family meant ownership. I hurt the one person who loved me without condition, my mother, because I thought I was entitled to her world. Turns out the only thing I ever needed was her patience." The sound of gentle applause broke through, followed by a few sniffles. I looked down, trying to hide my tears, but Lydia caught my eye and smiled. "Everything you see here," she said, "is because she never stopped believing I could be better." I couldn't look away. For a moment, it felt like time folded in on itself. Every memory, every fight, every heartbreak, all leading to this one moment of quiet redemption. When she finished speaking, she stepped down and came over to me. The guests drifted toward the food tables, music began to play, and she wrapped her arms around me. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me when I gave up on myself." "You made it easy," I said, smiling through tears. "You just had to come home." The afternoon melted into laughter and music. June sang an old folk song while Tara strummed the guitar. The lake shimmered gold in the setting sun. Later, as the sky deepened into dusk, Lydia and I walked down to the dock. The lanterns reflected on the water, tiny orbs of light floating like memories too gentle to fade. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, her voice thoughtful. "I think about what's here," I said. "That's enough for me." She looked out over the water. "I'm applying for a master's program, social work. I want to make this official, not just help women, but teach others how to." I smiled. "Thomas would be proud." "I hope so," she said softly. "I finally get what he was trying to do, not just protect us, but prepare us to protect others." We stood there quietly, the sound of waves tapping against the dock. She leaned against my shoulder like she did when she was a little girl, back when life was simpler. I ran my hand through her hair, streaked with the first hints of grey. "You know," she said after a moment, "I used to think karma was cruel, but now I think it's just patient." "Patience is the hardest kind of love," I said. She nodded, smiling faintly. "Guess we both learned that the long way." As the evening deepened, the women who'd stayed at Haven began lighting the last of the lanterns. Each one carried a note inside. A promise, a memory, a lesson. Lydia read hers aloud before releasing it into the water. "I promise never to confuse forgiveness with weakness," she said. "And I promise to use my second chance to build them for others." The lantern floated away, drifting among dozens of others. The water glowed like a quiet constellation. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft lapping of the waves and the occasional laughter from the porch. The light shimmered across Lydia's face, softening her features into something timeless, the kind of peace people spend lifetimes chasing. I looked at her and said quietly, "You finally learned the difference between wealth and worth." She turned to me, smiling. "You taught me that." I shook my head. "No, Lydia, you lived it." As she leaned against me again, I realized something Thomas must have known long ago. Family isn't about control, forgiveness isn't about forgetting, and revenge, the real kind, isn't about hurting back. It's about choosing grace when bitterness would be easier. The stars began to appear, one by one, mirrored in the water below. Lydia watched them and whispered, "He'd love this, wouldn't he?" "He'd say it's about time," I replied, and as the lights rippled across the lake, I understood what peace really meant. Not silence, not stillness, but the moment when love finally stops needing proof. The morning after the lantern ceremony, the house was filled with the smell of coffee and cinnamon. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window, catching the steam from the mugs lined neatly on the counter. Lydia was already up, barefoot, humming softly while flipping pancakes on the stove. For a second, I just stood in the doorway, watching her. She caught me smiling and said, "You're up early? Couldn't sleep?" "Habit," I said, pulling out a chair. "Old people don't sleep in, we just recharge fast." She laughed, handing me a plate. "You've earned a slow morning." As we sat down, she unfolded the newspaper that had just been delivered. A small headline caught her attention. "American man extradited from France in multinational fraud case." There was a photo, grainy but unmistakable. Eric. She studied it for a long moment, then quietly folded the paper and set it aside. "He looks smaller somehow." "Guilt does that," I said. "I don't even hate him anymore," she admitted. "It's like he's just irrelevant now." "That's what real healing feels like," I told her. "When the person who broke you finally stops owning a single thought in your head." She nodded and took a sip of her coffee. "I think you're right." The rest of the morning was quiet. We took a walk by the lake, the air cool and crisp. The water shimmered under the winter sun, reflecting the faint traces of the lanterns that had drifted out the night before. Some were still visible, far from shore, glinting like distant promises. Lydia stopped and pointed. "Look, they're still out there." "Good lessons always float," I said, smiling. She laughed softly. "You always have a line ready, don't you?" "I had to. Your father liked to argue." That made her grin, and for a moment I could almost hear Thomas's chuckle in the wind. Back at the house, the phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, our lawyer. "Morning, Mrs. Cooper," he said. "I just wanted to inform you. The French authorities confirmed that your daughter's name has been fully cleared. There's also restitution coming from one of Eric's seized accounts." I looked over at Lydia, who was organising files by the window. "Restitution?" I repeated. "Yes, ma'am. Roughly $100,000. You can claim it as his legal spouse during the time of the fraud, or we can reject it on principle. Your choice." I smiled faintly. "Principle, please send it to Haven by the Lake under the Foundation's name." There was a pause, then he said, "That's very you, Mrs. Cooper." After I hung up, Lydia looked curious. "What was that about?" "Justice," I said simply, "the quiet kind." She raised an eyebrow, and I told her. Her mouth fell open. "You're donating it? All of it?" "Every cent," I said. "We don't need it, but a lot of women who come here do." She crossed her arms, smiling. "You know, Mom, you make revenge look like charity." I chuckled. "That's because it is. The best kind of revenge is building something good where someone tried to destroy you." That afternoon, we met with the small board of volunteers who helped run Haven. Lydia presented her new proposal for expanding the financial literacy program. She was poised, articulate, and persuasive, explaining how the funds could be used for workshops, job training, and emergency housing. The vote passed unanimously. Afterward, as people packed up their papers, one of the younger volunteers, a shy woman named Emily, lingered. "Miss Cooper," she said softly, "I wanted to tell you. Your story changed how I see my mom. We hadn't talked in 2 years, but last night I called her." Lydia's eyes softened. "How'd it go?" Emily smiled. "She cried, so did I, but it's a start." When Emily left, Lydia turned to me, her voice trembling. "That's what Dad wanted, isn't it? For people to find their way back." I nodded. He knew that one act of grace can echo longer than 100 acts of anger. We stayed late that evening, reviewing plans and cleaning up the meeting room. When we finally stepped outside, the sky was streaked with violet and rose. The lake shimmered beneath it, calm and endless. Lydia took a deep breath and said, "You ever think about what he'd say if he saw all this?" I smiled. "He'd probably say, 'About time you two stopped arguing and built something useful.'" She laughed. "Sounds like him?" We walked down to the dock, where the lanterns had drifted back to shore overnight. A few had dimmed, but some still glowed faintly, flickering against the dark water. Lydia crouched and scooped one up, brushing off the dew. Inside was the message she'd written the night before. "I promise never to confuse forgiveness with weakness." She looked at me. "I think I'm finally keeping this promise." "I think you are too," I said. We stood there as the breeze rippled across the lake. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no guilt left, no resentment hiding under the surface, just stillness, earned, not given. Later that night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table and wrote in my journal. The same one Thomas had given me years ago, back when life was simpler and the biggest problems were bills and broken faucets. October 10th, I wrote. We made it. Lydia's laughter fills the house again. The lake is calm. Justice came, not through punishment, but through peace. Thomas was right. Kindness isn't weakness. It's the proof that pain didn't win. I closed the notebook, turned off the lamp, and looked out the window one last time. The moonlight danced on the water, soft and steady. A single lantern still floated near the shore, faint but alive, like a small heartbeat in the dark. And as I watched it drift, I whispered, "We did it, my love," she learned, and I finally rested. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It breathed, full of life, forgiveness, and the quietest kind of justice there is, peace that no one can take away. The lake outside shimmered like glass under the early light, and for a moment I just sat there, coffee in hand, quiet all the way through. It struck me how strange life is. The same house that once held betrayal now held redemption. The same daughter who broke my heart was sitting upstairs, planning new ways to help others rebuild theirs. That's the real end of a revenge story, isn't it? Not the shouting, not the courtroom, not even the apology, but the silence that follows when peace finally feels safe again. The kind of silence where love doesn't need to prove itself and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. People think family revenge stories are about getting even, but they're not. They're about getting wiser, about standing tall when everyone expects you to collapse, about using the pain you were handed to build something better. Because sometimes the sweetest revenge is just living well, with dignity and calm. So if you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, if your own story sounds a little like mine, remember this: you don't have to fight loud to win. Sometimes you just have to outlast the storm and let kindness finish the sentence. And if stories like this speak to you, real, raw, and full of quiet power, then stay with us. Subscribe for more family revenge stories, and family drama that remind you strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just smiles and keeps going.